interestingly, the main conclusions of the report, and which there are multiple of, and it's extremely damning, of UK PLC in general, but also of the government. But the main finding on the electoral system is that the British voting system, or the paper-based voting system, is largely sound. So
because
no evidence.
It's difficult to rig people crossing a box. If we voted electronically, then that would be hackable, but putting a cross in a box...
It's very difficult to stuff ballot boxes in Britain. It just really is, because you need vast amounts of people to conspire to go into polling stations and simply count ballots that don't exist. So the central finding, as so much as evidence exists, which I think goes to Stuart Hayes' point of no one really looked, but as evidence exists, no one rigged the voting system. The wider point is the influence that Russia brought to bear on voters before this election, the Scottish referendum, the Brexit referendum, and especially the use of social media. I mean, we know everyone was piling into social media, and the use of social media by Russian influencers to make people think certain ways was certainly substantial, and that's one of the central findings in the report, that social media companies simply must remove content that isn't appropriate, that is the work of state actors, and the government hasn't done enough to stop that.
The report talks about how Russian influence in the UK is the new normal, it says. Successive governments have welcomed the oligarchs and their money with open arms, providing them with a means of recycling illicit finance through the London laundromat and connections at the highest levels, with access to UK companies and political figures. And we've seen a lot of talk of this, Russian donations to the Tory party and the influence of money. And so this report is looking, it's not just at, what happened at general elections and attempt, because obviously in a way it's easier, isn't it? If you want to influence politics, don't try and influence 60 million people voting in a general election, influence a handful of people at the top of government.
Yeah, that's absolutely right. And this is a very comprehensive report. I think from the initial reading that we've managed to do so far, the most damning stuff is going to be not on vote ringing and was the Brexit referendum, it's not the Scottish referendum. It's going to be the massive systematic invasion of the financial system and an attempt to invade politics by Russia, Russian oligarchs and the Russian state, which the Intelligence and Security Committee very patently says the government turned a blind eye to, took its eye off the ball. The central finding of the whole report is that the government took its eye off the ball on the threat, the wider threat from Russia, underestimated the response required, in their words, and is still playing catch up. And on the dirty money, which I think is what we should be calling it really in shorthand. Effectively, they call, again, strong words, they call the City of London a laundromat to launder dirty Russian money that may well not have been earned legitimately. And everybody knows this is going on. Vast city, respectable city institutions and banks carry this out, but it is potentially criminal money, or if not, money earned via nefarious activities which the rest of the world would not consider very likely, via oligarchs benefiting from a state that imprisons, tortures and denies human rights. So very strong language there, and a very fascinating paragraph on the enablers. So this is not just the big boys in the city laundering Russian money, but it even calls out lawyers, accountants and estate agents, possibly my favourite paragraph so far, who are, and I quote the committee again, who are wittingly or unwittingly de facto agents of the Russian state. So if you're an estate agent selling an oligarch a £5 million house in central London, and you don't ask him where he got his money from, then you are doing wrong, which is a very powerful conclusion to call out huge sectors of the UK commercial industries.
And the report talks about the inherent tension between the government's prosperity agenda and the need to protect national security. So, because they wanted the money, they wanted the investment to bolster the economy, maybe a blind eye was turned to the national security implications. As Kevin Jones and Stuart Hose were just saying, questions weren't asked. There's a section in the report about the EU referendum, and there was lots of what they call open source studies, which is basically other people, academics and journalists who've written about pro-Brexit or anti-EU stories on things like RT and Sputnik and the Russian state media outlets and bots and trolls and that sort of thing. And so the committee tried to establish whether there was any extra secret intelligence which would shed light on the influence in the Brexit referendum. They got in touch with MI5 and said, what do you make of all this? And they came back with 6 lines of text No, unfortunately, we can't tell you what that is because it's all been redacted. Before and a lot of it was just pointed to other academic studies. And the report again says this points to basically extreme caution on the part of MI5. They just didn't want to get involved in casting doubt on democratic processes. And particularly one is contentious as the EU referendum. Nobody really wanted to ask too many questions, to probe too much, in case it showed up that the outcome of one of these, the EU referendum or other votes, might have in some way been swung by Russia one way or the other.
Yeah, and that was obviously Stuart Hosey's central accusation, is that not enough was done to get to the bottom of not vote rigging, but what all those influences on social media would have, how that affected the vote. I'm looking at the report in its entirety now. Runs to some 46 pages. The last 2 pages, possibly the most interesting, the annex, in which it does detail exactly who said what to them and where the evidence is. This annex in the public copy is completely redacted. There's nothing in there whatsoever. Ditto the classified oral and written evidence section of the report, that is wholly redacted. So we don't know what was said to them. But I think we can trust the committee to come to conclusions very honestly and truthfully from the secret evidence they've seen. And it's important to remember, not all this evidence can be put into public domain. This is evidence gathered painstakingly, possibly at the risk of life and limb, by organisations like MI6, GCHQ, and revealing their trade craft is very dangerous and would mean that we don't get access to that sort of intelligence. So the fact they've redacted something, I don't think is a conspiracy in itself. But clearly there will be further questions by those wanting to ask about referendums. And I think, in my personal view here, Matt, this whole debate on did someone wrongly influence the outcome of the referendum, that's been running for a long time now. You and I have spent many years in our trade arguing that one out. I think those who have always felt the referendum was wrong and Brexit shouldn't have happened and it was unfairly fought will leap on this. Those who thought the referendum was all right and liked the outcome will bat it away. And I suspect it probably won't change the price of fish massively.
And obviously, there's an argument that if Russia was capable of influencing the outcome of elections, the people running those campaigns were also attempting to influence the outcomes, and will, the argument over who was most influential in all of that will be played out again and again. Just on the subject of redactions, in the main report, they used sort of 3 stars, 3 asterisks in a row each time something's been redacted. There were 175 times that crops up in the report.